Hi everyone, I'm Carly from BigchainDB and one of the organizers of tonight. So I want to thank you all for coming and extend a very warm thank you to our hosts at Blue Yard for the space and the pizza and the beer. We have two really great talks tonight. We're going to start with Peter Harris. He's the founder of Resonate. We'll have a quick little session for questions after presentation, so if you have any, just wait until then. And then a little break before Tim presents Koala IP. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you. I'll let you get started.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Carly. So thanks for coming out on this dark and stormy night. Hopefully we'll be able to cover some interesting topics here. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of feeling that post-vacation IQ drop. Does anyone know what I'm talking about?
Vacation? No.
No vacation. So so basically Resonate is a new streaming music cooperative. So we're going to look at why a cooperative, what's different about the service, and then how does it connect to BigChain. So the most kind of obvious thing that people tend to ask me, like, well, why make another streaming service? Aren't there already enough? And the answer is yes and no. There are lots of streaming options available, but a lot of them are not serving the needs of the content creators that are basically supplying all of the media that's being consumed. So there's a number of reasons why this is the case. Part of it is the business models themselves, and part of it is the relationship that a lot of these corporations have to the major labels, who basically have contracts that are very oblique and do not benefit most of the creators. So the other part of it is the business model itself with streaming is kind of flawed. If you look at the relationship between streaming versus downloads, does anyone want to guess how many times you'd have to stream a song to equal the price of a download?
1,000.
That's in some cases, yes. If you're on a major label, that it may take you 1,000 plays to reach the price of a download, but it's actually a little bit lower. Anyone else want to guess? Throw on a number?
100.
A little bit in between. Yeah. So if you look at Spotify's quoted rates, if you take like the lower part of their quoted rate, it's 150 streams as a totally independent artist that's not on a label. If you're on a label, you're getting a much, much lower cut. And in most major label contracts, you don't even know what your definitive cut is. And you can't really process the data because when they send you out the spreadsheets and the reporting, it's like these just miles and miles of Excel spreadsheets showing like the various per stream rates through all the various countries. And it is almost impossible to really track what is being paid. So 150 streams. Can anyone think of a single album that they've listened to 150 times?
Octoon, maybe.
Octoon, maybe. I may have you there, like 150. That and Kind of Blue. There's a couple albums I think I've listened to that many times. So it's really like the business model of the existing streaming services is not really effective for our artists. So we came up with a totally new concept. It's called Stream to Own. And what this is about is getting out of the monthly subscription model, because this is what is the cause of the problem. If you've got $10 a month, all you can eat kind of model, you have to divide up all of the costs and royalties, and usually you get some artists that are really huge and they benefit, they get a much larger share than independent artists. So by breaking away from the streaming model, from the monthly subscription model, and going to a micropayments process, what we got here is a way to go from streaming to owning. So you kind of see like this, there's this very clever chart. I don't know if you can all read the numbers, but the first play 0.002, and then it doubles, going to 4, 8, 16, 32, until you reach the 9th stream, and you're paying about 50 cents or so. So you reach, by 9 plays, the normal price of a download. And it's really kind of just interesting. This was just kind of lucky math because this discovery phase is kind of where we're really just curious. We're browsing around. We're listening to lots of different stuff. We're trying out new artists, new genres, and this is a low commitment kind of phase. You're not really like that dedicated to any particular artist in that stage, but it's really like when you start to listen to the 5th or the 6th or the 7th time to an individual song, you're paying more because at that point you're a fan. And so our pricing model is based around micropayments that can allow us to do real direct accounting, so it's very one-to-one, and allows us to create a more sustainable revenue model for artists. So that's the new model that we're hoping to present. We've basically recruited like about 1,000 artists and just over 100 labels, indie labels from around the world who have signed up to participate. We're going to start releasing an early version of the app and the streaming player this year. And now let's move into the cooperative question. So why a cooperative model? That's the other thing that's really fundamentally different about Resonate is that the way that the existing companies have been kind of taken over by these larger money interests leads to shutting artists out of the process. So great example, of course, is our friends across town, SoundCloud, who basically started getting gradually larger infusions of VC capital, who then said, well, you need to find a way to monetize this. And one of the early changes that they made to the user base was they started to charge producers for having content in the platform. And this is one of those kind of like early fundamental experiences for me personally as an electronic producer, because I was very frustrated with this situation where they change a fundamental aspect of their service and I had nothing to say about it. And so I went from having like 20 to 30 tracks on their service to having about half of that overnight because they changed their terms. And so that's why we decided to go with the co-op model so that we could have a democratic process where people can be engaged and involved with deciding how the features work, deciding what kinds of things we should focus on, and then putting the power and control back into the hands of the people that should be benefiting from it. So next, I would like to kind of take a look at how this relates to Qual IP and to BigChain, and really excited to be working with these guys because for quite a long time it was really clear that doing stuff on the blockchain would be really beneficial because you could have accounting methodologies and tracking that would be totally transparent, and that you could basically say it's in the blockchain, you can't lie about it. This is what was played, this is what should get paid. But for a long time I thought it's going to be years off because of the throughput problems and the fact that any kind of streaming service, it's just massive piles of data. And so when I first heard about the launch of BigChain earlier last year, it was really exciting to see that someone had solved that. And then it got even better because they started to concentrate on the Qual IP, which we'll be hearing about later. And this is really a groundbreaking kind of tech that will have some really great applications for us. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is that if you try and find out any kind of streaming royalties data from any of the services, you'll see wildly different reports because it's not really clear what the definitive rates are. But with a blockchain micropayment system like ours, you'll be able to see exactly what was played and what needs to get paid, and it will be just black and white. There won't be any disputing it. Where it goes even farther than that, it gets really interesting, is things like performance royalties. I was talking with someone earlier about this, that there's this huge kind of cultural problem in live performance between bands and singer-songwriters and DJs. So singer-songwriter goes to a venue, and at the end of the night they say, what's your set list? and they fill it out, and they say, these are all the songs that I played, because they know that they're going to get a check. Maybe it'll take a year and a half from Gamma or one of the other collection societies, but they'll get a check eventually for the fees that the venue is paying to those collection societies. So singer-songwriters and bands, they love to do this because they know they're going to get that money. A DJ, on the other hand, doesn't want to put out a set list at the end of the night because that's their IP. It's their secret sauce. They most of the time they want to keep that stuff secret because they have something that somebody else doesn't have, and if they're just turning over their set list at the end of the night to a promoter or to the venue, they're going to lose that special content. So a way that we could do a blockchain tracking system with Qual IP is by having the original content and authors listed in the blockchain with a tracking device inside a club that can automatically detect what's being played, and all these systems can kind of communicate with each other much faster in ways that basically don't happen currently. At the moment, it's very, very time intensive and labor intensive for a lot of that stuff to take place. Takes sometimes a year and a half for people to see payments from Gamma and other collection societies because it's a very manual process. So this would be one way that could all happen much faster. So I think I'd like to go to questions now. I'd like to just give some general intros and then really open it up to what kind of drives your interest and what aspects from what I've talked about you'd like to expand on. Please.
Okay. So according to this, you're going to distribute royalties, of course, to labels, of course, to the artists themselves. But what about the songwriter behind the songs? Do they get a cut as well?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're going to start off with only having content that's 100% written and performed by the artist, and then gradually move into doing covers. Because we want to make those relationships with the publishers directly so that we can start to really look at much more efficient payment systems. And so, but yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I mean, I hate Spotify, but
why do you hate Spotify?
Well, I mean, Spotify is good at in the sense of users, because you pay one lump sum fee per month and then you can get all the library you want. But it's absolutely shitty for songwriters because they give close to nothing to songwriters. They're not a songwriter themselves. So, but I mean, as a user point of view, it's why wouldn't I just pay a lump sum fee and get whatever I want? Because every time I play a song on your app, it charges me. So in the long run, I would have almost certainly paid more than the monthly subscription fee from Spotify.
Not necessarily. It depends on the average. If you look at the averages,
as a heavy music user.
As a heavy music user, you might be paying a bit more with us. But you're also in a place of knowing that you're directly supporting the artists and that they're getting a better share of the income. For average users, it actually works out to be pretty the same. And we'll get you next. Because the average Spotify listener is 120 minutes a day. And if you're in this discovery phase, you can actually listen to that amount of music for $2 to $3 a month.
Okay.
So it only goes up a bit more when you start to reaching into really becoming a fan, and then you're owning the track. And of course, at the 9th play, it's free. You don't pay us or the artist after that. So it becomes owned at that point. And I think that this is, there's a lot of kind of debate around this topic. And I think we'll really start to see that kind of playing out, especially if the rumors go through that Apple's going to drop the iTunes store. That we could end up being in this kind of indebted servitude relationship with these content providers, always having to just pay them, this monthly fee in order to have access. And then if your Wi-Fi goes out or if you go over your data cap, you don't have access anymore. Well, that's why ownership is still a good thing. So yeah, it does depend on listening habits, definitely. You had a question?
I wonder why artists should earn anything at all from consuming their art indirectly. Why don't they just earn money by going on tour and making concerts where people are super willing to pay a lot of money? I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, put your money on the internet, put your music on the internet for free, use it as a advertisement and distribution channel, and make your living off by giving concerts. I mean that's already the reality in a sense, because you don't earn anything from Spotify, factually.
Yeah, if you're a new artist, if you're on SoundCloud or Spotify or Apple, you're learning it. It's not that it's necessarily wrong per se. It's that there's first, you don't have any direct connection with those artists through those platforms, and that's another thing that's different about our service with being a co-op, is that we're going to build in lots of other avenues for fans and artists to communicate and collaborate. And so, it could evolve to a point where actually streaming does become kind of a loss leader for everything else, whether it's ticketing and merchandising and VR, AR, 360 video, whatever. And I wouldn't be surprised if it does go in that direction and that becomes a pivot that we do. But I think that a lot of what this is about, that's why I chose the phrase love phase, is that it's really about when you really listen to a song 5 or 6 or 7 times, once you've hit that point, there's a connection between you and the artist. Before that, it's very transitory. It's just, maybe it's just background music or something that you're just, kind of listening to at work. And so that's a big part of what this model is about, is recognizing that when you really make that connection with somebody, you want to give them a bit more money because you want them to create more music. So the other aspect of this argument that you make is that not all musicians can afford to tour. It's very costly to go out on tour, and a lot of artists don't even, or just barely break even, and not everybody is able to sustain that lifestyle. If you got families, it's very, very hard. So I think you had a question over there.
No, you were before. I was a musician back in the day. I do receive these reams of spreadsheets of royalty rates. And I do know that on certain services like YouTube, iTunes, and some others, you get a different rate for previews and plays. Mm-hmm. So my main question is, what constitutes a play? How long into the track do you have to
45 seconds for us, yeah. So if you skip a track up before 45 seconds, you don't pay for it. Okay. That shows that you're not interested in it.
I'm a music consumer, so I like Spotify because I get this immense amount of content for a fixed price. And a lot of the artists will hate me, but I think that's a typical profile of a music consumer. I also like the fact that I could download my stuff on Spotify than it is and take it offline. And it seems with this, I kind of have to keep my connection with the internet going for the stream, or is there some kind of offline solution?
Essentially, it's when you get your ownership, it's all offline because you own the file.
Yeah, but you say if you play the same song multiple times?
Yeah, I can't say exactly about the caching issue because we're still looking at exactly what we're going to use for delivery mechanisms and stuff. I've read a lot of things around that caching can actually be a problem with Spotify users because of data limits on mobile phones and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, we're presenting to start. We're presenting to kind of an audience that cares a bit more about music and money. That I mean, having more direct connections to artists and
yeah, that's it. I mean, I think it's awesome if I find myself in the hit list of my favorite artists. Like he knows that I'm listening to him.
Yeah.
Or
yeah. And at the moment, like on Spotify, it's a dead end. They've got a follow button, but it's about following the next release that comes out on Spotify. There's nothing else to do. Nothing else. There's nothing else beyond that. And so that's a huge part.
Yeah, that would be added value for me on this platform.
Yeah, it's to be able to really have direct connections in it. And I also hoping that we're going to build in some localization features that will make it really being also about like, you know, your scene and where you are and connecting back to going out. So coming back and then go back over here.
So you did mention the word payment a few times, so I don't know why that jumped at me, but can you kind of elaborate? Can you elaborate on how you're planning to handle the payments?
Well, with you, of course. Actually, one of our developers over the holidays actually set up a Bitcoin node on one of our servers. So,
Victor.
Sorry?
Was this Victor?
Oh, you know Victor. Oh, that's right. You're the guy that Victor knows.
He was a freelancer for us.
Right. No, it was somebody else, but I haven't had a chance to quiz him about it. But as far as I know, from what he was describing, it sounds like we're able to actually process Bitcoin payments directly off the server immediately. And I mean, that's going to be a transition phase. I mean, trying to get musicians onto a crypto token is going to be a challenge because they have a hard enough time keeping track of their Facebook password. You know, you don't want to like have their royalties go into a black hole where they'll never get it out.
But Bitcoin is the answer there.
It would be, yeah. And I mean, we'll also just be paying a lot out in fiat too, of course. Yeah.
I have a question how you can get going with this in Germany if GEMA is still basically forbidding anybody to take part in any scheme that is not them seeing a cut.
Yeah, it's crazy. GEMA's contracts with artists is that if an artist wants to stream or offer downloads on their own websites, they have to pay GEMA the licensing fee, and then most of it will come back at some point in the future. They're not even allowed.
That's true. I mean, it might be very little that comes back.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's lots of questions about that for us, and so we are looking at doing what's known as a pan-European licensing thing because there is a bit of consolidation going on with the collection societies across Europe to try to make things a bit more simple. So that's kind of to be determined. We're also looking at doing regional releasing so that we may not, even though we've got quite a few developers here, we may not be starting off in Berlin or Germany because of those issues. So it is a very complicated mess that we're still trying to get kind of sorted out. There was. Yeah.
So, to what degree have you considered, think it's applicable to media that's not music? For example, TV shows, like first episodes were free and onwards or whatever.
A lot of people are looking at micropayment stuff for other types of content. I think the problem around it is repeat watching. For us, micropayments works because music is a repeat kind of content thing. You know, I don't think I've ever really rewatched a series on Netflix. And the other issue that I think is kind of a problem is that, there's a lot of talk about YouTube content creators and that they, some of them getting like massive followings in the tens of millions, and they're making almost nothing, and how much more they would make on a micropayment scheme. But the problem, of course, is that all of those fans are finding them through the platform. They're not, finding them through their own personal website or something. And so there's a lot of different startups that are doing micropayments for video, but I think they may have a hard time with the, really creating the audience. So because it's much more transitory and single use, single consumption. Where are the other hands up?
Yeah, quick question. What kind of data will you store on IPDB?
To start, it's going to be all of the information connected to a release. So, who are the performers, and then it'll start to expand out to to have more robust kinds of licensing and contract stuff, and also the payments in place. Keeping track of that. Yeah.
Could you elaborate a little more on the technical side of the choices you make to implement what you're showing?
In what regard specifically?
Like you mentioned involvement with the BigChain. Is it blockchain based what you're presenting here? Or?
In terms of the content storage, absolutely, because we want to have all of the content going into a blockchain system so that it's capable of being used outside of just our streaming service. So, by example, GeoTrack ID is a partner that's doing performance royalties tracking, and they would be very keen to collaborate with us on building that sort of base infrastructure, because then it's something they can access for doing performance royalties trackings. Publishers are another example. I've spoken to several that are really interested in getting their stuff into a blockchain-based system because they're sick of having to deal with multiple database formats across multiple sectors of the industry. So that's where we start with blockchain stuff. But when it comes to like the actual app and everything, it's just regular kinds of stacks, running off of regular servers. So.
Yeah, what's the story with downloads? When you download something, can you transfer it to another computer? Can you transfer it to another device?
Yeah.
Do you have your own player?
Sorry?
Do you have your own player that you need to use?
No, you wouldn't be limited. You would own the file.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in multiple formats, you could choose what kind of format you wanted to keep.
Regarding the cooperative, who are the members, or who is allowed to become a member, and how does
Everyone.
that work? Everyone.
Yeah.
And you just buy in, or?
So we're known as a multi-stakeholder co-op, and that is the worker consumer co-op is the typical model. An example is that I often use is there's a company out of Seattle called REI, and they make rucksacks and other kinds of camping gear and all that stuff. So they're a worker consumer co-op, and you can buy in as a consumer through a membership fee, and you earn your share as a worker by either working in the store or being in the factory that's making all the products. So that's a worker consumer model. So we're kind of taking that and saying that the worker classes consist of the people building the system as well as the musicians who are supplying all the content. So they're the workers. They earn their shares through either working on the platform or contributing content, and then fans buy their share, and it's $5, €5. And that would give you royalties. And there's actually another little graphic here that shows this idea a bit. So you have different profit and voting blocks. So music makers get the largest share of voting and profits, and fans actually get profit distributions as well, most of which will probably convert back into more streams. And then the development community, which will consist of paid staff, but also a large volunteer community as well, could also receive profit distributions out of this model.
So 2 questions. How do you get big names to join the system in terms of music producers? And then other part of that question is how, without that, you get users, barring the big names.
Yeah, it's a gradual process for sure, because the bigger names tend to be on labels or major labels. And a typical major label contract does not allow them to distribute outside of those systems or outside of whoever the label chooses. Indie labels are much more open and flexible about working with us. And so we've signed up some really nice ones. There's like Planet Moo out of the UK, RB&G out of New York, and Rope-a-Dope out of Philadelphia, and they have some really strong communities supporting those labels. And it's just a gradual process, and there's a point at which we'll be able to kind of, I think, get a larger chunk of the indie market, which is 35%, because there's a number of industry associations that will help us kind of reach out to those, to that segment. And those are the folks that really kind of are, sort of hurting the most from the existing status quo. And there are lots of famous artists in that independent sector. Up until like maybe just a few weeks ago, Adele was an indie artist. I think she just sold out to Sony or somebody. But I think Taylor Swift is on an independent label. So there are definitely ones out there. And it's just a matter of time, showing that we've like released the app, we've started taking in money, and we've made payments. There's quite a few that know about us already through various connections, and they're kind of just in a wait and see mode and make sure that we, get the app out. Did you have a second question? No. Okay. Do you?
What have you learned from big failures like SoundCloud? It's the most famous one. They're currently failing. And I think Tidal was also this kind of label store that kind of failed. Then Neil Young also did like a store and it failed. So a lot of people failed trying what you tried. Have you learned anything? Have you looked at
Oh, sure. I mean, that's a large part of why this is here, because I was looking at all that for 15 years. I was looking at all the examples of what was going on for a really long time, because I started thinking about music distribution stuff in like '99, because I was working in LA building a lot of websites for music artists, and I was also uploading content myself to services, and so it was always this kind of obsessive question. SoundCloud never had a business model to begin with. That was their main failing. They created a fantastic app at a point when it was desperately needed, so they had huge user adoption, really super fast, and the classic internet startup scenario of VCs seeing like, oh wow, there's you got massive user adoption on this. Let's dump some money in and we'll figure out the business model later. Bad decision. And so, yeah, they've probably got. I think they'll be dead this year. From
I think they're being bought.
No, there was really, really close, but they backed out because Spotify is rumored to be going through IPO planning, and so that was going to really mess up. There's lots of complicated relationships with the major labels, with both services, and so that was going to turn into a huge mess for Spotify, so they dropped it. But yeah, it's like nobody else wants to buy them because they don't have the business model still, fortunately. Tidal shot themselves in the foot. They could have been us, but what did they do? They brought out a bunch of like ultra famous, ultra rich rock stars and said like, "You're not giving us enough money. Give us more." And if they had gone up, and for every famous artist, if they had brought up somebody that nobody knew and said, "This guy also owns the service," then it would have been, there'd be no need for this. And that's the difference, is that there's a handful of super famous rock stars that own Tidal. They also kind of tried to base it, and this is similar to the Neil Young thing, on the audiophile market of really high quality, and it's just such a small market that it's hard to make it work. And I think Neil Young's project kind of collapsed, or they're trying to pivot to something else, into hardware now or something, because it's a really, really small market that cares about like super high fidelity streaming.
And they buy vinyl, which is having a renaissance.
Yeah, yeah. It's like we just go back to vinyl, exactly. So I wouldn't have been trying to put this together if I wasn't looking at everything else and seeing like why isn't all of that working, so it's very much informed.
And the Ucho music, I mean, they are out there too, right? Have you heard of
them? Not really. They're not. I mean, they're sort of talking about some new ideas in the last month or two. I guess they made a presentation at DevCon. We know these guys and we're in regular contact, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of extremely active development going on. Everybody knows about them because they were the first blockchain music project, but it was a really, really kind of very limited consumer-facing kind of version. It wasn't about infrastructure at all. Made Imogen Heap a lot of money because they used Ether, and the value of Ether went through the roof. So she was very happy about that. But yeah, there's not much going on with it. at the moment. Others?
As a consumer, I really like Spotify and SoundCloud because of the discovery tool they have. So, what product? I mean, what are you working on with the discovery of new music on the platform?
A lot of it's going to be based on curation, and I'm also hoping on a localization features so that you can interview really about like what's your local scene and really connecting with the people that are around you, so that you could discover a new artist that happens to be playing at a show across town next week. And then later we'll look at licensing some systems that do a similar thing as to like the Econext stuff that Spotify bought for Discover Weekly. There are lots of other algorithmic-based recommendation engines, but a lot of what we want to do is human-based. So we want to make it really centered around people, and so that's curation.
Maybe we'll just take one more question and have a quick break for it. I mean, we can continue discussion afterwards. People will be around a little bit, but just to continue. Anyone else have a question?
Anyone? Ferris?
So you're doing a startup, not just a startup, but a co-op where you've actually designed it where you can't get rich, which is like congratulations. That's actually really amazing, right? Like that's actually super courageous. What is it that made you like decide to do this burning thing in your heart that said, I'm going to do this thing and dedicate a large chunk of the next part of my life to this?
Well, it was looking at the rise and fall of so many startups over the course of almost the last 20 years, because I started building sites like in 97 or 98. And just seeing how the process gets totally corrupted. And I love the Snapchat example of what that story is about, that delete is our default setting. And then they had a bunch of money come in, and then at some point, there was a conversation that said, well, you can't actually do that anymore because you can't make money off of this if you can't analyze the content from your user base. And so that's no longer their position anymore. And I've heard stories about the Spotify terms and conditions that sounds really horrifying. I've never had the time myself, like no one else, almost anybody else, but I do know somebody that read it and she left the service after reading I think it's the privacy policy. And so, yeah, I mean, it's like these systems end up getting corrupted because of the influence of capital, and inevitably somebody gets screwed. And so, we have to, to borrow the cliched quote, be the change. And I like to often say, and I guess this will be my closing remark, that decentralized technology without decentralized economy is ultimately meaningless, because if it's being directed and controlled by the investor class, it will end up being corrupted in some capacity in the long run, and somebody will end up being used in that process. And so that's the goal of the co-op, is to try to make something that can't be corrupted. And yes, that does mean that I could be voted out of my job. I hope I will someday. So I definitely don't want to do it forever, but yeah. So that's the close.